of the proposed TMDL compliance approach, pollutant categories, and compliance units. It also discusses how BMPs will be sufficient to implement the applicable waste load allocations. The amendment fact sheet serves to explain the rationale and the assumptions used in deriving the TMDL compliance approach. Because of the variability of how TMDLs are written by regional boards and EPA, staff considered and assessed the following factors. The commonalities of all TMDLs where Caltrans is identified as a responsible discharger, the unique challenge for a non-traditional MS4, or not your typical large urban MS4, because of the development of implementation requirements for 85 TMDLs that are administered by 9 regional boards, and the many of the TMDLs that are shared jointly with other dischargers, making it difficult for an individual discharger to comply with an aggregate waste load allocation. Another factor is the state highway system that reaches into numerous impaired watersheds. Caltrans' contribution into numerous watersheds where it's generally less than 5% of the total contribution. Multiple pollutants that are often in the same impaired watershed, the identification of sites that are a contributing source, the determination of appropriate control measures for the pollutant categories, and a phased implementation over several years due to the numerous TMDLs. So a categorical pollutant approach was developed to address the TMDL compliance, and it doesn't perfectly address each and every TMDL, but staff believes this approach to compliance provides consistent TMDL implementation requirements, is sufficient to achieve the waste load allocation, and results in time and cost efficiency for water quality improvements. The categorical pollutant approach is based on BMP implementation, and many of the TMDLs have been designed to address the same pollutant causing impairment and to progress towards the achievement of the waste load allocation. So 8 pollutant categories have been established. The 85 TMDLs will be separated into 8 categories by pollutant type, then grouped for common treatment and control actions. BMP implementation and prioritized reaches means that Caltrans will address discharges for each impaired water body after an inventory of reaches is completed. So the reaches within the applicable TMDL watersheds are evaluated to establish a prioritized list of reaches, and TMDL implementation activities are to begin within the highest impaired reaches each year. So this next slide depicts what a reach might look like, and there are a couple of mismanagement practices that Caltrans approves. So a reach is a segment of the stream channel delineated by the TMDL, and we have a few TMDLs that have delineated reaches. Where there's not a delineated reach, then Caltrans is to do that, only for prioritizing of the reaches. An individual reach can have multiple pollutant categories, and the photos at the bottom, on the left photo, it's a continuous deflector separator, a CDS unit, that treats runoff by screening sediment and debris before depositing the debris in the sump. The one on the right is an extended detention basin where runoff is conveyed from the highway system through a storm drain system for removal of the accumulated sediment. So these are only a couple of the approved BMPs that Caltrans uses. The heart of the amendment is in attachment 4. It prescribes the implementation requirements and lists all the TMDLs where Caltrans is identified as the responsible discharger. The attachment has 3 sections. The first section gives direction and general guidance on the development of prioritized reaches. The second lists the applicable DMDLs and implementation requirements. Also included are the requirements for cooperative agreements, and describes the reporting of project implementation delays or cancellations and how to deal with compliance units that have already been credited. This third section, it has the general and categorical requirements for all TMDLs. That includes a comprehensive monitoring plan for BMP effectiveness, adaptive management that requires the use of monitoring data to conduct ongoing assessments, and reporting to improve accountability and transparency. And this is done through the annual reports, has a particular report called the TMDL Status Review Report. Compliance units. TMDL compliance in the amendment is all about BMP-based approach to compliance that addresses the highest impaired water bodies first. The goal is to implement control measures in every TMDL watershed over a 20-year time frame. So Caltrans is to quickly move on the implementation of controls to address the impairments in the highest priority watersheds. The way we define a compliance unit is that it's a unit of measure to quantify the amount of implementation for TMDL compliance purposes. So one compliance unit is the equivalent of 1 acre of the department's right-of-way from which runoff is retained, treated, or otherwise controlled prior to discharge. The determination of compliance units considered the number of right-of-way acres that must be treated to ensure that all TMDL watersheds were addressed over a 20-year time frame. And we knew it wasn't possible or necessary to treat 100% of the runoff. As I mentioned, they're typically a small percentage of the total contribution to a watershed. Caltrans proposed an annual compliance unit commitment based on individual pollutants categories for an annual fixed number of compliance units. And we agreed that some of the pollutants categories had an overlap coverage with acreage and controls, and others did not. And after identifying which had the overlap of coverage, we determined that the total right-of-way of acreage requiring treatment corresponded to 33,000 acres of right-of-way. So the goal is to treat all TMDLs with a 20-year time frame, and that equates to 1,650 compliance units every year. And I previously mentioned the cooperative agreements. Under this section of Attachment 4, cooperative agreements qualify for compliance units, where Caltrans contributes to a cooperative effort. So there are a fixed number of compliance units that must be achieved every year, and the tracking system for this compliance unit is through our stormwater multiple application tracking system. Region-specific requirements were adopted to deal with the specific conditions in the regions. And the North Coast region has region-specific requirements that addresses sources of sediment-impaired watersheds. The approach to addressing the sources of sediment has been modified to complement the TMDL compliance approach in this amendment. And likewise, the San Francisco Bay region has a section on trash load reduction, and their region-specific requirements have been modified to align with the trash compliance approach. Finally, this proposed amendment is focused, streamlined to achieve compliance, and it contains consistent implementation requirements for 85 TMDLs, including future TMDLs. It requires the installation of control measures followed by monitoring for BMP effectiveness and adaptive management for ongoing assessment and reporting to improve accountability and transparency. Compliance units will be tracked in SMARTs and reported annually in the TMDL Status Review Report, and staff believes that specificity and accountability will result in time and cost efficiency for water quality improvements. The public review comment period ends on March 28th, and staff will be available to address questions from the public. Thank you, Madam Chair and board members. At this time, the municipal stormwater staff are available to answer any questions you may have.
I like these pictures. It reminds me of home. But I do. I get nostalgic when I see things like this. I know where that is. Questions? I know you did a very good briefing. I appreciated that the other day. Maybe wait? Questions before? Okay, well, let's move to public comment. I'm going to start with Scott McGowan, Chief Environmental Engineer for Caltrans. Hi.
Hello, is this on? Can you hear me? Excuse my water, I'm fighting some allergies. Well, good morning or afternoon, Chair Marcus, Vice Chair Spivey Weber, and board members. My name is Scott McGowan, and I am the Caltrans Chief Environmental Engineer. My responsibilities include serving as a statewide single focal point for the Caltrans Stormwater Program. I want to thank you for this opportunity to share Caltrans' perspective on the amendments to Attachment 4 and 5 on our statewide stormwater permit being presented here today. Caltrans supports in concept the modified total maximum daily load requirements proposed to be amended in the State Water Board's order. The existing individual TMDL requirements have presented Caltrans with significant statewide implementation challenges by requiring different ways of doing business in each watershed across the state, including different requirements of managing the same or like pollutants statewide across all 9 regional boundaries. I want you to know that Caltrans very much appreciates the efforts that Chief Deputy Director John Bishop and his staff have made to address these inconsistencies. We communicated the challenges of implementing a program of this scale to staff, and they thoughtfully considered this information in formulating the compliance program. These communications yield an opportunity to discuss the uniqueness of a statewide Department of Transportation as a municipal discharger, our project development process, and other activities that are different from a typical municipal discharger. These discussions allowed for us to consider water quality improvement techniques in total for a state highway system built and operated to maximize the movement of goods and services statewide. The amendment provides Caltrans a consistent statewide approach for addressing waters impaired for similar or like pollutants. Statewide consistency helps Caltrans integrate water quality activities into everyday business practices, so policy, guidance, and training can be crafted with clear and concise messages for staff to follow, yielding more consistent performance. This is a more efficient way to regulate a statewide municipal permit that includes 12 Caltrans district boundaries and 9 regional board boundaries. This approach will also result in greater water quality benefits by focusing Caltrans' efforts on pollutant sources with a direct correlation to highway operations rather than existing TMDL approach, which could be subjective. The proposed language introduces a novel way for a statewide permittee to demonstrate TMDL implementation. The idea of annual compliance unit equivalent to an acre of Caltrans right-of-way treated for the pollutant or pollutants of concern. The annual compliance unit approach gives Caltrans a clear performance measure and explicit means to comply with TMDL requirements. Caltrans is required to implement treatment measures or its equivalent in all reaches across the state to improve the quality of the impaired waters. The cooperative implementation alternative is a necessary provision because in many or most urban areas, Caltrans right-of-way is built out, and there are no opportunities to retrofit Caltrans facilities. The state highway system was built decades ago, and retrofitting the system is difficult. It also stands to reason that partners or other stakeholders can generate efficiency through economy of scale, especially when stormwater flows commingle, where a larger treatment device can be constructed rather than numerous small devices. So Caltrans appreciates the introduction of an incentive for cooperative implementation efforts. Caltrans' experience thus far with dozens of agreements from around the state are that they can take years to build consensus before a cooperative agreement can be executed, or an MOA, MOU. We are concerned that there are limited opportunities for cooperative implementation, but we would like to explore statewide programmatic agreements or lump sum contributions where Caltrans contributions would be administered by a third party, such as a contributing to a state grant or other programs. We feel this can kickstart other watershed efforts statewide. This also allows flexibility for the use of different colors of money in the state highway account funding scheme. Although we believe this TMDL approach is a better way of regulating Caltrans as a statewide entity and represents a forward-looking regulatory scheme, we don't know today if the annual performance threshold of 1,650 compliance units is set at an achievable level. And over the first year or two of implementation, we will have a better sense to determine that. And this is due to our different buckets of money that we use for stormwater and the means of compliance for each of those and how we can be flexible and move that around. But I have some ideas that I think will help. Our financing process currently has program projects in the pipeline, even prior to finalizing our prioritization of the reaches statewide. Therefore, we'd like consideration for credits, compliance credits on those projects that cannot be pulled back due to sunk costs. With that, I am committed to this approach. This will require Caltrans to be creative, think outside the box on how we approach water quality when looking at all capital projects and institutional controls statewide. I feel now that we can clearly direct our statewide staff to maximize these performance measures or compliance units when looking at all Caltrans and other stakeholder projects and other activities within the prioritized reaches in the given watersheds. This approach gives us the impetus to do that. Caltrans will be submitting formal comments requesting clarity on a few items, consistency changes, and a few corrections to the changes on the cut and paste. Thank you for your time.
Questions? All right, let's hear from our next speaker, and then we may have questions for both. Shawn Bothwell, California Coastkeeper Alliance. Hi, Shawn.
Hi.
I
Good
thought you were
afternoon,
here
everyone.
for everything today, but you're just speaking on this one.
Yeah. I read the notice wrong. I thought this was going to start at 9, but it was informative of what I saw today. Hi, everyone. My name is Shawn Bothwell. I'm the staff attorney for the California Coastkeeper Alliance. We represent 12 waterkeepers statewide. Most of them work on a daily basis on stormwater monitoring and curtailment of stormwater pollution throughout the regions of the state. I should also mention I'm here on behalf of Heal the Bay, too, who couldn't make it. I wanted to start by just acknowledging the state board's difficulty here in trying to come up with a TMDL program that needs to cover 85 TMDLs and for a permittee that's responsible throughout the state. You know, I acknowledge that that's a difficult position to be in. I also appreciate staff's, attempt to really try to maximize resources and try to put them in a place where, it could do the most good for water quality impairments and really try to improve water quality. I think our primary overall concern is this consistent, reluctance to use numeric effluent limits in permits. And this isn't my usual, spiel that I give. Comments we've made in the past for the Caltrans comment regarding general permit terms. This is TMDL, compliance. And as staff points out, it's a different standard. It's not the MAP standard anymore. It's a different standard when it comes to TMDL compliance. And staff cites the 2010 EPA memo that really is encouraging the state board to start thinking past BMPs and start really thinking about putting numeric effluent limits into the permits. Unfortunately, the citation that they use is the one that justifies using BMPs if they're found to be feasible, which the regulations do require that BMPs can be used if numerics are found to be infeasible. And there is a lot of analysis done in the attachments and all, but I don't feel like the report really rises to the level of what the memo requires and what the law requires. I understand that there's a lot of TMDLs with general requirements for Caltrans. It's general for all the joint parties. And I understand this BMP approach for that because that is difficult to get your head around of exactly what Caltrans needs to do. I think my real concern is there are TMDLs out there with specific waste load allocations for Caltrans, specific requirements, specific schedules that they need to meet. And I don't see how those requirements, those specific criteria, it's not feasible to incorporate that into this permit as numeric effluent limits and incorporate the time schedules that are available there. So that would be my main ask, is that we reevaluate those specific waste load allocations that are to Caltrans. For the CU compliance program in general, I think there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of discounting, the 50% discount for the collaboration, the ASBS is because they can't get to positions. There's a lot of discounting involved, and I feel like there's not enough substantiation of where the 50% discount, for example, came from. So we would ask that there would be a little more explanation of the work done to get to that point, to get to that number. We would also ask that there be a margin of safety put into this 1650 compliance unit, that we don't know exactly what that's going to get us, and that maybe we should think more of margin of safety rather than reduce that number. Also, we have concerns about that collaboration credit. We really feel like there needs to be some type of criteria of what counts as a credit, because this is TMDL compliance that needs to actually improve water quality impairments. And just last, I think at the end of the day, whatever program goes forward, we need to make sure that Caltrans is meeting their waste load allocations in all their TMDLs. And so I would just ask that the permit puts Caltrans on notice that they still need to meet all those waste load allocations in the TMDLs, despite the BMPs that they put forward going on. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Questions? Those are all valid suggestions and questions to be responded to. Do you all want to talk about them now? Do you want to talk about them in briefings between now and adoption? What do you suggest? What would
be happy
most
to try and
helpful?
answer some of the questions if the board members have them. Now, we will, of course, we just received this morning a comment letter that describes that a little more detail, so we'll be able to go through it in more detail, and we'll likely be wanting to talk to Shawn and Kirsten about the concerns. So we're happy, at your pleasure. What we wanted this for was so that we would have an opportunity to hear these kind of concerns prior to the day of the hearing.
No, I always
for
think that's
adoption.
great.
And so that we might be able to understand and provide some of the additional information that they were looking for. I'm concerned on the ability to meet their need for numeric waste load requirements, but we'll talk in more detail with them about that.
Even when they're already in a permit?
Well, the number might be in the permit, but that doesn't mean that it relates directly to a numeric effluent limit, and that becomes very difficult to make that leap.
Oh, I see what you mean. Of course. Okay, I get what you mean. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I don't want to give it short shrift in point, but it does seem more efficient of everyone's time if you all will meet with Shawn and those guys and flesh it out and have a conversation, and then do your rounds of briefings with us before we get there, and with Caltrans, of course. Unless you want to meet with us before you meet and after you meet, it's up to you, really.
Well, what
I know we're
really-
delightful, so that's something that you really enjoy doing.
What I'd really like to do is have a chance to sit down and go through their comment letter, and then
Flesh it out.
set up a meeting with Shawn and Kirsten and whoever else, and make sure that we understand what it is that they're asking, and the concerns that they have, and then we would likely be looking at that and any other comment letters we get at March 28th,
Right.
to do as we always do, evaluate those comments and see if any changes we think are necessary to. I would request that you all think about what you've heard, and if there are any concerns you have, let me know.
Yeah, I may have to go back to read some of the language. I mean, I like the notion of, I really like the notion of a discount for collaborative processes that are going to get something done on the ground in a community. The issue there, as it always is defining it well enough that I don't think we have to quantify it to the max, but do we have that adequate amount of
So I'll give you
guidance or quantification? So give me an example.
our guidance at this point is that that actions that a group are taking that are associated with addressing the problem, not in quantifying it. So group monitoring doesn't count. They're required to do group monitoring. But if they are doing feasibility studies for where their treatment should go or how big it should be, that are leading towards treatment decisions, then those do count. That's where we broke it, essentially between the idea that you're quantifying the problem and the idea that you're fixing it. And so that was the break point. You could choose a different break point, but that's the one we choose. We chose the 50% because we wanted to leverage their the money. The concept, you're all shaking your head, so I probably don't need to go into much detail on that concept. But the concept is that when they provide money to a group, that group is also providing money. We're getting a lot more for that money than an individual project that's being done by Caltrans. 50% is not a magic number. It was the number that we thought was a high enough incentive to get Caltrans interested in doing it and to get the folks at the local area wanting to do it.
Well, that's good. Thank you. You all have made a lot of progress in terms of translating TMDLs into transportation infrastructure challenges, which are statewide, and having a consistent system, as has been noted, is very beneficial. Not just for Caltrans, but for all transportation agencies in the state. You know, this is really important, in my mind, formative work that will help you know, locals in roadway impacts. So we've really focused today on BMPs, how roads can be reimagined from a civil engineering standpoint that incorporates water quality goals and rolling back the unanticipated or unintended water quality consequences of the transportation infrastructure. But we focused on, I often think of the water system simply as a watershed protection issue and a channel protection issue. So what in that framework, today we've been talking about the watershed, you know, the acreage, the compliance units approach, which Mr. McGowan touched on as something that's useful from an engineering standpoint. That's that area you're going to treat. But another effect the transportation network has on water quality and resources is the channel. And in our regulatory programs, we touch that with our 401 water quality certifications usually. However, in a TMDL framework, we have the opportunity to incorporate both